The new firewall, where human insight trumps every trick. We're not hacking systems, we're hacking behaviors so you won't click. No complicated code, just tried and true brain science at play. Social engineering for good, the best defense is in your mind today.
Welcome to Phishing for Answers. The opinions expressed here are solely those of the individuals involved and do not reflect the views of their employers. Get ready, because the next live episode of Phishing for Answers is starting right now with your host, Joshua Krumbaugh, the CEO of Fish Firewall.
Psychology is the new firewall, where human insight trumps every trick. We're not hacking systems, we're hacking behavior so you won't click. Tick.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Phishing for Answers. Today I am here with Dwane Sterling, the CIO of Skidmore College. Hey Dwane, how are you today?
I cannot complain. A little colder than I like, but I can't complain.
I think everyone's been a little colder than they like lately, other than the Alaskans. Apparently it's summer up there while we get winter down here. So interesting times. Tell us a little bit about how you got into tech and just your background.
So, what's interesting about that is that I actually started out in engineering. And then I wound up working for a supermarket or retail company. And it just seemed like all of the forces were pulling me towards technology. I got really, really heavy into project management, but all of my project management was once again focused on technology. I started programming solutions there, and then implementing them. And ultimately, that was kind of the beginning of my journey down this technology pathway.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's for me. I think I've always just gravitated toward tech as well. Just I don't know. From the first time I used a computer, I was fascinated by it and how it worked and all of that. So very interesting. So let me ask you, right before we got on the show, we were talking a little bit about all of the chaos that has happened in, with large language models and just AI in general lately. What's your biggest takeaway of all of the, I don't know, disruption that has happened in the world of AI this week?
At this point, this seems like the epitome of the arms race, right? And I always go back to that hype model, which is at the beginning, everyone's excited about it, and then it kind of goes up on that upswing, and then I think you swing into the trough of disillusionment, right? And so I think a lot of folks, particularly in my position, are trying to figure out, where are we on that cycle? Have we leveled off? Are we still on the upswing? And in the middle of that, obviously, we've got all these different vendors that are now battling it out for supremacy on this AI front. So it's really kind of a very exciting place to be, although it makes it very challenging to try and make decisions about how heavily you're going to invest in any one solution. Seems like
Yeah.
everything's just growing so fast that, let's say you decide to invest in one, and a significant investment, several
Yeah.
$100,000, then tomorrow the competitor comes out with something that blows that first thing out of the water. So it's challenging for us to make
Well,
the
just this week and tomorrow, like every tomorrow, the competitor is blowing them out of the water.
right.
It's probably
So,
why we didn't get 03 Mini yesterday like we were supposed to.
I have to imagine at some point that one or two of the vendors that exist out there will come out with a product that is unshakable from the perspective of competition, right? And it'll be very clear that you should move in that direction. The problem is, how do you become an early adopter when you don't know what the future holds?
So I almost certainly think it's gonna be Google. Number 1, we saw what they just did with Willow, but a lesser publicized event that happened in the AI space, particularly the large language model space, was that they came out with a paper called Google Titans talking about a different type of transformer. So we've been training all the models using the same basic architecture and the same type of transformers. And so they've re-architected it from the ground up. It's much more like the human brain. So it can formulate a hypothesis, be wrong, learn from its mistake, and continue improving along the way. And they solved the memory issue, and I think that was the bigger thing where it has, really good long and short term memory built into it. So it's a fascinating read. We haven't seen any technologies, I don't think yet, based on it. But as they come out with models that are trained on that one, I suspect that they're going to be far superior to anything else in the market.
Well, I mean, I
And even
guess
right now, we see them with context windows bigger than anyone else can even think.
I guess the question that I'll have about this is when we start talking about the applications for AI, right? We know that on some level there's kind of that chat GPT where your lay user can use the system and create fantastic things. But I think the other piece that we have to think about at the very least on some deep level is how is this going to impact business? Right. So whatever the consumer grade product is likely going to be somewhat different than whatever applies to the business side of the equation. And I think that there is yet another arms race that exists over there. How do you create a product that generates productivity in an environment where everybody's looking to cut costs all over the place?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think what I see most of these companies doing right now is really targeting both simultaneously.
Hmm.
Which it's hard enough to sell to one, to go and market to both B2C and B2B at the same time, is interesting, but, they've actually been doing a really good job at it, I think largely because of the media hype around it.
Hmm.
Uh, but it's a cool, interesting technology, but when you look at it, they've got their API side of things, that's, entirely aimed at businesses, and then they've got their, subscription-based, which is aimed at either the average individual or at their $200 level, more the researchers and, people like that. So I mean, you do see it a little bit, but I'm interested to see how they're gonna do it. Like, Google Gemini right now, they've got it built into all of their workspace, but it's really not that functional yet. I can't tell it. I mean, if you'd think if it has, if it's built right into the core of my Google Workspace that I could say, "Hey, go schedule an appointment between me and Dwayne on, this coming Friday at 3 o'clock," and it could just go do that. But it doesn't, and it can't yet. So it'll be interesting to see how they give AI more capabilities in the future. And I think that's how it's really going to help business. When I open up an email and I've got, suggestions right there, for to write it. Or I would even take it a step further. If we've got, a task list somewhere, plugging into it, pulling the data and auto preparing, the correspondences based on history of accounts and things like that. So I don't know. It'll be fun. I've had the opportunity to speak with a couple interesting people, and there's some really cool use cases around it. One of the ones that I like was in the business side. It was with the Alberta Health Services, their CIO, and he was talking about how they've got some pilot rooms. Right now, it's not deployed throughout their entire hospital or, I guess, health system, but they have a few doctors' offices that are equipped with AI microphones, and they're tied into their health management system, and they listen to everything, and they automatically create patient or notes, which are saving the doctors 2 to 5 minutes per patient per room. But on top of that, if there's a patient history of like an allergy and they discuss a medication that might have an interaction, it's automatically flagging those things. So,
Well,
um,
I think you that point is really, really salient. I think if you were to talk to anyone that exists on that physician side of the equation, one of the things they're really looking forward to is having more time to actually connect with with the folks that they're treating, right? And so,
yeah,
being able to almost take the technology out of the way, so to speak, so that the physician can get closer, in theory, to the patient, I think would be really, really, really powerful. Especially if you can ensure that everything that's said is captured appropriately, and maybe more
yeah.
specifically, the things that are not supposed to be captured. Right, anything that's considered to be private gets excluded by automatically.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that we've gotta get better at. Well, it's not just the data and controls around that. In general, cybersecurity, once again, has been an afterthought when it comes to, these large language models. And so and it's always the case. I mean, has cybersecurity ever not been the afterthought?
I don't
But
I don't know that it I'm not sure that cybersecurity can be at the forefront, right? Because cybersecurity by its very nature is a force of limitation, right? And so if you apply a force of limitation to people that are, we'll say, driving the frontier, trying to do new and innovative technologies, unless they're doing that in cybersecurity is almost by necessity going to have to come second because it's catching up to the folks that have these new and out there concepts.
that's completely fair. Uh I do think there's an element where we could bake more in, but you're right. It is a little bit counter to that creative process, and who knows if you put too much constraints in on out of the gate, you might not get the innovation that you're getting as a
Right.
result.
It's
So
a philosophical it's a philosophical thing. I think at the end of the day, maybe in one of our previous conversations, you'd mentioned basically just wanting people to have a higher level of either technical or security based IQ. And so perhaps if we cross that bridge and we get everyone to think a little bit more aggressively about security in general, they might incorporate those concepts a little bit more into their innovation. But I think that a true creative might say to you, I don't particularly start my creative process out with constraints.
yeah, no, that's very, very valid, and yeah, makes perfect sense. Regardless, I do think that not just cybersecurity, but security in general has got to be at the core of what we're doing here. And I see a lot of businesses rushing to try and deploy AI without necessarily thinking about how is it going to impact my data. And the example I'll give is that, first of all, I've never seen a good, to date, a really great general purpose AI, aside from like the chat GPTs. But if we want to train them on a specific job to make them really good, that it helps to make them very specific to one job. So like I might make an AI just for my sales team, another AI just for my finance team, and give them access to different tools. But I hear of all of these different companies creating these full enterprise-wide AIs, and I have a million concerns about it. For starters, just how are we controlling the access to information? And if we don't have sensitive information in there, how is it a helpful tool to our people?
Well, I mean, to a certain extent, you're dealing with a really challenging problem, right? Because the AI in and of itself is, in theory, smart enough to circumvent your standard security, right? So you're 100% correct that this presents a pretty significant problem. I think the other piece that you're dealing with is I'm not entirely certain that many businesses have really figured out the concept of IT security by itself, right? And so if you don't have an organized, or let's call it a mature IT security model that you're operating off of, and then you drop an AI in there, then even the best intentions, you're still not going to be able to leverage high levels of security in that situation.
Yeah, that's fair, and, yeah, not inaccurate. Okay, so talking about AI, it presents a lot of opportunity, but a lot of threat as well. What are you focused on in terms of just the average lay user and education about AI, how to use it, what they need to be concerned about, things like that?
So on our side, we've got, we'll say two different sides, right? When we say lay users, that we could just be talking about people that just want to write papers, or we could be talking about, someone that is creating a job description. There's the other side of that that's a little bit more on the business side of the equation. So far, if I'm really honest, it's really just exploration. Right. So on the lay user side, we're getting them to the point where they're more comfortable with the technology. Right. We start thinking about, oh, what, like when the calculator was first introduced, just getting people used to the fact that they've got the functions, they can do these things, and then hopefully they grow their universe using this additional tool that we've now acclimated them to. On the business side of the equation, and here's where things get really, really fun. We've come to realize that our business processes are in many cases just really, really, really inconsistent, right? And this is not to say that they're bad, but we tend to have a lot of exceptions, right? So this process runs this way, except for this one particular exception. A lot of times we don't even realize that we have those exceptions until we try and change something. Right. And
Yeah.
so as AI systems try to circumnavigate that, they're running into challenges because the user that implemented the AI isn't aware of all of the exceptions to their own business process that they have baked into their the way that they do things. So it's been an interesting pathway to try and kind of traverse this and explore. But for the most part, it's been, let's acclimate the users in our environment to the tools, and then hopefully they can innovate within their specific use cases or areas around or using that new tool.
So a side, topic, but it's, nothing to do with AI, but it's along what you were, just, talking about. Um, Sorry, it's Friday. I just throw a complete blank there. I
It's the
never do
cold
that.
weather. It's the cold
But
weather.
hey. Okay, but I wanna switch gears here a little bit anyway. Um, so when we're dealing with users and training and trying to get users to do things the way you want them to do, or more importantly, trying to prevent human error, uh, what's your opinion on the argument versus, on carrot versus stick? Are you more of a carrot person or more of a stick, beat them over the head until they submit?
So I think in higher education, and I would actually say similarly within healthcare, because of the dynamics that exist there, you almost have to start with carrot, right? Stick is there, and stick will always be there, but traditionally, in my experience, it takes a lot longer. Maybe I'll say it this way: you have to provide a lot more runway for stick. You can't, unless you have something that is truly groundbreaking, it's happening right now, it has to go, right? Separate of that, you need to allow people a lot of runway before you apply stick. Otherwise, at least in the industries that I've been in, there tends to be backlash that creates negativity around what you're trying to employ, right? So let's take something
Yeah.
that's basic that everybody just kind of accepts, something like dual factor authentication. I think in a perfect world, you get into an organization that doesn't have dual factor or multi-factor authentication, and you just flip a switch, and then everybody just understands that they have to do that. And if you don't, if you don't go along with the system, then you lose access. I think all of that sounds great. in reality, if you do not give people solid enough run up to it, enough forewarning on the front side, then you're going to face backlash from your organization. So I tend to like to start with carrot unless we're in an emergency situation, and then the stick is eventually there.
Yeah. Well, and I think that, to be fair, losing access because you didn't set up your MFA isn't much of a stick either.
Depends on who that person is who loses access. Now, if it's I don't know, if it's Karen from accounting, maybe there's not so much buzz. If it's half of the vice presidents and they have emails that they need to send or they did not receive in a timely fashion, that tends
You're
to
gonna
generate
hear about it.
perhaps a little bit more backlash.
Yeah, no, you'll definitely hear about that, and that's fair. Um, I do think that understanding the change management process and more importantly, explaining to the user why is very critical for any of these things. When the user understands why, they're so much more likely to cooperate, get it set up. And if the why is just, well, yeah, I don't want to get in trouble, I don't want to lose access, that's not as effective as, well, I don't want to lose my paycheck because the company got hacked and we went out of business. Because that is the potential reality. Not saying that all cyber incidents are business killers, but there certainly have been plenty of cyber incidents big enough to be business killers, and a few that actually have. So,
Yeah, I mean, so even that statement I find to be very interesting. I agree with you, right? Straight off the bat, I agree with you. I would also like to inject the success that your IT team has experienced to this point also factors in, right? And so it's very hard, let's say, as a new CIO who's just gotten there, you haven't established anything for yourself. People are going to question the decisions that you make and the direction you decide to move the organization in. If you've been there for 2, 3, 4, 5 years and you have a long and well tested or established pathway of success beneath you, I find that you have people give you a little bit more leeway, a little bit more flexibility to make decisions, especially in the spirit of protecting the organization.
agreed. So to that, the social element of being a technology leader, if you really want people to work with you, to trust you, to allow you to make those difficult decisions without, it's not necessarily that they're your boss, but there's a lot of people in any company that can really make your life a pain or give you a headache if they want to. And so particularly with those, but really with the whole organization, there's something to be said for having those conversations with them, helping them to understand why it's so critical. And it's often the business leaders anyway. So it's when you connect it to business risk and to business growth and really just to the overall business drivers, those VPs are very quickly going to understand, in my experience, and get on board probably quicker than the average employee. But it doesn't matter as long as you have leadership and on board.
Yeah, I mean, I'm biased when I say this, so I'll warn you on the front side. Very biased when I say this. I believe that we expect CIOs to have a skill set that is probably far and away more varied than many of the other vice presidents or C levels, right? It's not enough for us to just know and understand technology, right? We also have to be able to deliver a message. We also have to be able to execute on plans to a high degree. And I always say this, and I say this very tongue in cheek, but I don't know how many, let's say, let's just use CFO. I don't know how many CFOs are, on top of having a high degree of mastery over the finances, are also expected to be somewhat warm and fuzzy. Whereas I'm finding that more and more is the case that CIOs are expected to have that high level of, whether it be social savvy or relatability, because that's how you institute those changes. And so maybe
Yeah.
that's it. Maybe it's whenever you work in an area where you're expected to institute a considerable amount of change, you really do have to understand the human condition and be able to
Yeah.
kind of circumnavigate that universe. I'll say one more thing before I let this go. It's interesting when you work in either higher education or healthcare, right? Because in both of those environments, there are factions. In higher education, it's obviously the faculty. In healthcare, it's the physicians, where they can decide as a group, we don't like this person any longer. And they can literally vote that you are not working out for the organization. And I don't know how many industries have that same sort of dynamic.
Well, I think to that though, we want the IT, the information security teams to be business enablers. And when we are not the departments of no, particularly on the cybersecurity side of things, because too often cybersecurity is thought of as nothing more but then the anchor that's holding everyone back or whatever. And so if it's a lot more of yes, let's do this. However, maybe we could add this one or two things to it to make it more secure, and a lot less, "No, you can't do that." I think we're going to have better results there, and we don't want I mean, to me, we wouldn't, as a department, ever wanna be in a situation where so many people disliked us that we could get cast off with the popular vote anyway. So, yeah, I think even though that is the case in there, ideally, we are, really building those bridges and those relationships, and you're right. CIO is a unique job in that regard. Very similar. I mean, I would argue the CEO is the same way because you're always having to make unpopular decisions and convince people that it's the best interest because it is in their best interest, even though this department got the budget and this department didn't. There's always somebody that's unhappy with just about any decision if you get into a high enough of leadership position anyway. So.
That's fair. But I want to hit on what you said from before about the Department of No. Um, I agree with you completely, right? And I think that over the course of the past however many years, with any department that I've ever run, it's always been let's work in collaboration with whatever the functional team is towards trying to help them with their solution, right? And certainly that's a magnanimous position to take. But even separate of being magnanimous, understand that if you do not provide them with a solution, these are highly functional teams. They want to get their job done. They will come up with a solution on their own.
Yes, they
If you
will.
don't help them, they will come up with a solution. And there's no guarantee that you're going to be okay with what that solution was. So I've always found that it's just much better to take a how can we help you succeed approach rather than we're going to put the harness around you and then pull you in whatever direction we see fit.
Yeah, and by the way, having, seen it firsthand, 9 times out of 10, you're not gonna like the decision that they came up
Oh
with or
yeah,
the way they came up with on the
that's
road.
very true.
When it's the development team, they'll be opening up random ports just to pull to the whole internet, and, no no concerns here, but I mean, you're right. When we're involved and we have those conversations, we can do so much more to help prevent those types of things from breaking down. So, human error exists in so many places other than just phishing. And I know phishing gets the bad rap for being the biggest and baddest of all human error. But in terms of cybersecurity, I mean, it's top 10. I mean, it's certainly number 1, but there's some very big number 2s and number 3s and number 4s out there. Like, credential, reuse of, just employees that have had their same password breached in 20,000, breaches, and they go and use the same one here. And so, they were exposed to credential stuffing attacks, or my favorite 'Cause I spent a lot of time in red teams and it's mostly, I say mostly fixed now. But for the longest time, we told people that they needed to have 8-character passwords, they had to be 3 out of 4 on complexity, they had to change their password every 3 months, and then we put no real guardrails there other than that, and that led to me being able to get into organizations quicker through their VPN than phishing their users
Yep.
because the password this time of year is winter 24, winter 25, spring 25, but there's 3 passwords that I can guess, and I will guarantee get in off of somebody, and not just somebody, a bunch of somebodies, including often domain admins,
Well, let me introduce an additional concept which you probably know about intrinsically, but maybe we don't talk about enough, right? I found that change control is actually a very, very serious security issue, right? And the reason for that is, let's say you have a, small to medium sized IT department, right? And an organized change management process would bring everyone through a lot of hoops. It would provide security, but at the same time, it would kind of slow you down a little bit, right?
yeah.
What I've come to realize is that the folks that have the power, right, whether it be a domain admin or it be a systems administrator, they become used to making decisions in a vacuum on their own. And the
Oh,
security
yes,
of
they
the,
do.
right, the
And
security of
those
the
decisions
organization.
impact, that risk that is way above their pay grade.
That's right. But in from their perspective, they're just getting their job done, right? And so, trying to figure out what rises to the level of needing organized change control can actually be quite a challenging thing. And if you get it wrong, now you have someone with very seriously privileged access in your universe making decisions that, to your point, are either above their pay grade or maybe even more importantly, above their IT security competency.
Uh, that's a very valid point too, because there have been just as many massive, massive, very expensive issues that were due to just making mistakes.
That's right.
Um, CrowdStrike, come on, not to pick on them, but, oh, that was a mistake, wasn't
That
it?
is challenging.
So,
So, but
I
I
was
would
so
be
glad to be a SentinelOne customer that day.
well. It wouldn't surprise me if many organizations, especially like I said, especially like the small to medium sized organizations, let's say sub 15,000 employees. It would not surprise me to see that many of these organizations, just to get through, have very, very weak change control. And there are a lot of these heavy decisions that are being made on a fairly regular basis by, folks that are in that systems administrator role, and they're just trying to get through their day, and they've got 40 people screaming at them to try and get something done so that they can do their work. So,
Yeah.
I feel the pain on that.
Yeah, no, and I mean, and on the IT security side of things, you've got this other element of risk where the younger, more junior people, just like in IT, instead of just making decisions or communicating risk like they're supposed to, they're trying to manage risk, and that creates its own issues as well. And so, yeah, no, I mean, it's. I think part of that, though, is really good training combined with good controls. And we have technology to only allow access as it's required. But yet I still don't see the amount of companies I should with a PAM solution in place. And even when they are, the credentials are only cycled once every 120 days. And the first thing the people do when they get the credential out of there is put it into a local, notepad or OneNote or whatever. Um, I'm not even kidding. I've been on pen testing teams that did that
Well, I,
before.
So you're talking about, like we'll say serious technical issues at that point. I've done, I've had pen tests done where we found that all of the company's credit cards were put into a a notepad file on somebody's desktop. And I'm like, oh, how fantastic, right? So,
My favorite was the IT admin, password sheet. Um, I cannot tell you how many IT directors keep an Excel spreadsheet of every password. And you can get into any networking equipment, any but just I mean, it's the keys to the kingdom,
yeah,
and
worrisome.
accounting is just as bad, finance, and it's just the difference is it's all of the bank accounts.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. All of this, from my perspective, goes back to it is just, it's an interesting job, but it is very challenging being a CIO nowadays. You have a lot of areas that you need to keep an eye out for, right? How do you get any sleep at night?
Well, so speaking of those areas, one of the things that I've focused on quite a bit in my career is role-based training. So all of those mistakes that we're talking about can be prevented with a little bit of training. Controls are a little bit harder, but training them and making them aware, hey, A, this is against policy to do this, but B, hackers are going to look for that password spreadsheet if you do it. If you reuse local admin passwords, if the single computer gets compromised, all of them are compromised. Just helping connect the dots to stuff that seems obvious to those of us that are in the business, but to somebody who's newer in IT and still, I mean, I remember being young in IT. I didn't have the level of understanding. So often I was so laser, or I guess nearsighted and focused in on that one issue that I didn't see the bigger picture. And I think that's just happening to most of the juniors, honestly.
I think we all, those of us have kind of grown up into consummate IT professionals. I think we can all look back at ourselves when we were younger and say,
I was the
I
problem.
wouldn't have, yeah,
That's
I wouldn't
that's
have
what I
been very
say.
happy. For me, it was, when I first started writing applications, I actually was on the business side, right? And so, as you can imagine, any solid CIO is not going to be very happy about someone on the business side writing applications that the business relies on when they're not under the umbrella of IT. Because, of course, if that person ever leaves the organization, the business has now become reliant on that particular application, and you're now going to have to support it. You know nothing about it, right? So, you
I
know,
I got once got hired to support that application. It was
oh,
pretty bad. So,
oh,
uh, and it was I guess with a normal application, if you're jumping in and supporting it, there's at least some level of
of
documentation.
course.
There's other
Oh, yeah,
developers that have been loosely related to it. You can ask questions. But when it's that one person
that's
that
right.
created the singular application for the business and every bit of the information is in their head,
Especially if
and
they're not classically trained in in how to do programming, right?
yeah,
They're not commenting any of their code, right? Things are
yeah,
structured in a very weird fashion. You call it spaghetti code, if you will. I mean, they are in essence a script kiddie.
yeah.
That's
Well,
only
and
more.
often that's what a lot of it was, were these really, really long strung together scripts, that, didn't really make a whole lot of sense, had no comments whatsoever. And the comments that there were 100% around, well, I guess for that person, not for any other developer in there, but it would be like, some mention about something they should change later, and it meant nothing to me coming in, so, um, but I do think along those lines that we really do have to be thinking about what roles we should be focusing on, because within each and every organization, you've got limited bandwidth. You're not gonna be able to educate everybody on every bit role. But finance making a mistake and wiring $1,000,000 to the wrong place, that keeps me up at night. Developers opening up, SQL port to the internet and, or an administration port to the internet, that keeps me up at night. So there are some things that I think you can focus on to help mitigate that threat a little bit. What roles do you find most critical?
I mean, for us, it's really going to be the folks that have privileged access within our universe. And once again, that gap between this is organized change management, and it's very clear that we need to seek approval over this. And hey, we're just trying to get through the day. So those folks on the IT side tend to, we'll say, keep me up at night. As far as the rest of the organization is concerned, interestingly enough, or maybe not so interestingly, it's anybody that is at a lofty enough title where when somebody sees their name come across in an email, they will immediately be flushed with whatever emotion drives them to do exactly what that person is asking for without asking questions or without thinking.
So the gift card titles, gift
Well,
card.
yeah, I mean, sometimes it's the gift card thing, right? That's often the way that they get kind of the small, the small
Yeah.
sums of money, but that can go right on up to, hey, we've changed the, where we're going to wire the money for this, I don't know, $50 million, construction project that we're
Yeah.
working on. So can you please change this over to here? Please don't reach out to me. I'm in the middle of a meeting. We're having a very busy day. Just change it, and I will let you know everything's okay later. Right? And before you know
Or
it,
or
wow,
in
yeah,
the case of the Hong Kong, deep fake where, the employee did ask questions and they're like, "Well, just jump on a Zoom call."
yeah.
And by the way, it's becoming more and more popular that when I talk to people, leaders like yourself, that they have already seen deep fakes in the wild. Um,
Mhm.
to that, have you seen anything?
So we have not actually, right? And that's interesting. So that's something that we're going to have to, we'll say, notify our universe about. That we're starting to see that more and more, but we have not actually hit on one ourselves.
Yeah, I mean, it's not everyone. I'd say it's probably maybe 10% of the technology leaders that I talk to, but 10% is still a really big number. I mean,
Oh
I
yeah.
think if 10% of my people are clicking on a fish, I'm terrified of that number. So, if 10% are, it's too much for sure.
I think that being able to lay down base rules about the way that we operate, I think that that helps, right? So, being able to say, please understand, under no circumstances will anyone ask you for gift cards in this universe. No, I mean, we laugh, but if you can hammer that message from a training perspective, then when someone does ask, and it's the CEO or the president, they ask for those gift cards. It triggers them. They say, "Oh, wait
Yeah.
a second. That I remember hearing that. That's not, that's not." And we've done that before, right? And I think many organizations have. As a good
Gift
example,
cards, urgency,
we will
authority.
never ask you. We will never ask you for your password, right? That's another
Yeah.
thing. We're now laying down the level here, right? And of course, I joke with everyone. I say, we're the IT department. We don't need to ask you for your password. So if somebody's asking you for your password, then chances are it's beneath board, right? But getting people acclimated to that. Back to your point from before about raising that level of IT security awareness or knowledge or IQ, whatever you want to call it, getting people to the point where they just understand here's the basic way that we do or do not do business, I think is super helpful.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. To me, those little things like, hey, gift cards should always set off a red flag. Gift cards are always a warning sign. But it's not just those things like urgency, authority, sunken cost fallacy. Like all of these things are biases that the user needs to be aware of because when
Yeah.
they are and they see that, they're instantly going to be suspicious of it. And I believe that our subconscious, which is our body's built-in self-defense mechanism, can easily be trained to detect cyber threats. And it's not through any complicated means. It's by helping users really truly grasp how urgency is going to be used against them, how authority is going to be used against them. When they understand those things, when these things come around, they're instantly going to throw up a red flag, and that employee's not going to fall for it. Unless
or
that employee is my brother-in-law, and then he'll fall for it. But,
Yeah, or opportunity, right? This is something we see in higher education a lot is our students are consistently targeted by, hey, I've got this job opportunity for you. It's
yeah,
a research assistant. It's going to pay $30 an hour. So we need for you to send us a check for the initial burst of equipment. We're going to send you a check as well. So we'll send you a check for $10,000. You just need to send us a check for 3,000. And of course, at the end of the day, their check bounces, your check clears, and you're out of $3,000, right?
yeah. I actually spoke with a student that approached me as a result of the podcast, but because her and her entire friend group had all fallen for the same scammer from the same exact person. And so that what they realized was that if any of them had told the other person and not been too embarrassed, they could have prevented the others in their group from having fallen. And her point was that we have to normalize it being okay to fall victim for these things, or people will continue to keep it a secret and everyone continues to fall for them.
It's very
And
true.
I thought it was incredibly true. And so since then, one of the things I like to ask technology leaders is if they've ever fallen for a fish, because it's just a great way to help humanize all of us in this industry. That being said, I didn't ask you, and we are out of time.
Oh,
So before we wrap, I do always like to just leave it open to the guest. Any sort of final bits of advice that you'd give to other technology leaders out there looking to, either grow in their career or just get better?
so, I'll say that the nature of our jobs as technology leaders has changed remarkably over the course of the past 10 to 15 years, right? We used to be primarily an operational department. And that's no longer the case. Make no mistake about it, they still expect us to have the operations on lock. But at the same time, while we're being operational, we also similarly have to be inspirational. And then once we've got that whole concept of being inspirational down, then we get to start being aspirational. So that's what I tend to try and leave people with that whenever I talk to folks. I say, our jobs are to be operational, inspirational, and then aspirational. And from my perspective, that's a transition, right? Leaders of the past didn't really need that. They needed to just focus on the operations. But now, with the new technologies that are out there and the impact that that's going to have on business, I think we really have to start being a little bit more aspirational in the way that we operate.
I agree. I think that's great advice. Well, thank you so much for joining today. It's been another a great episode. Thank you, and for those of you joining us remotely, have a great day.